They looked the part, graceful, articulate, and perfectly styled for the silver screen. But fame, as Hollywood proved time and again, isn't always paired with wisdom. Some stars fell for laughable health fads. Others got swept up in wild conspiracy theories. A few simply didn't know the most basic facts about their own films. They were adored by millions, but behind the camera, their decisions often left people scratching their heads. Here are some of the most popular vintage Hollywood stars who proved that charisma and critical thinking don't always travel together. Clara Bow. Behind the glamour, Clara Bow's personal life was tumultuous, and the media often painted her as a wild, unintelligent party girl. A sensational 1931 court trial exposed intimate details of her private escapades. Bow's secretary, Daisy DeVoe, was prosecuted for stealing from the star, and in the process, sordid evidence of Bow's extravagant lifestyle and love affairs made headlines. The Depression-era public, mired in hard times, turned on Bow for her perceived excesses, and her career never fully recovered. Paramount studio head B.P. Schulberg even nicknamed her Crisis a Day Clara for her constant off-screen dramas. In truth, Bow struggled with severe mental health issues. She retired from films at 28 after a breakdown. Doctors later noted her IQ was in the bright normal range, but others observed she had poor judgment and exhibited bizarre behavior. This mix of scandal, stigma, and emotional instability led many to underestimate Bow. Though she was a talented actress who defined an era, public perception fixated on her mishaps and meltdowns. The image of a foolish young woman consumed by Hollywood's excess. Bow's tragic early exit from the screen and later diagnosis of schizophrenia underscored how her vibrant public image masked inner turmoil. Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks was a 1920s film star whose rebellious independence led to famously poor career decisions. With her sleek black bob and magnetic screen presence in films like Pandora's Box, Brooks seemed destined for enduring fame. But she bristled at Hollywood's constraints and repeatedly defied studio expectations. In 1928, after being denied a promised raise, Brooks shocked Paramount by walking out on her contract to pursue films in Europe. Even more damaging, she refused to return to Hollywood to dub her dialogue for the Canary murder case when it was converted to sound, an act of open insubordination that infuriated studio brass. Paramount retaliated by spreading rumors that Brooks had an unsuitable voice and effectively blacklisted her in Hollywood. She compounded the mistake by turning down major roles. Most notably, Brooks declined the lead in High Sierra and a part in The Public Enemy 1931, roles that went to other actors like Jean Harlow and became breakout hits. As one historian noted, Louise Brooks was now blacklisted from Hollywood. Jobs became increasingly scarce. By age 32, her film career was essentially over. The woman once hailed as a trend-setting flapper icon ended up bankrupt and even did menial work outside the industry. In later reflections, Brooks admitted her pride and impulsiveness had cost her dearly. Indeed, contemporaries observed that Brooks was the sweetest girl, but you didn't cross her, a temperament that led her to spurn sound films and Hollywood's rules. In sacrificing steady work for autonomy, Brooks became an enduring example of a star who torpedoed her own career by not playing by the rules, leaving behind a legacy of both cinematic artistry and squandered potential. Roscoe Arbuckle. Roscoe Arbuckle was one of the biggest silent film comedians of the early 1920s, both literally and figuratively, until a notorious scandal abruptly ended his career. Despite his jovial on-screen persona, Arbuckle became publicly vilified as foolish and immoral after a 1921 Labor Day party in San Francisco turned tragic. A young actress fell ill and later died, and sensational press stories accused Arbuckle of assaulting and fatally injuring her in a drunken orgy. Though evidence was scant and Arbuckle maintained his innocence, the tabloids declared him guilty in the court of public opinion. After 3 highly publicized trials, he was acquitted and even received a written apology from the jury. Yet although acquitted, the scandal destroyed Arbuckle's career. In an era of rising moral scrutiny, he was made an example. Hollywood's new self-censorship board banned him from films in 1922, and even when the ban was lifted, the damage was irreversible. Arbuckle's once beloved name became a punchline for excess and poor judgment. The man who had just signed a record $1 million contract watched it evaporate overnight. Efforts at a comeback, directing under a pseudonym in a few short films, yielded little. He He died in 1933 at age 46, shortly after a small comeback attempt with Warner Brothers. Many view Arbuckle's downfall as the result of one fateful lapse in discretion, hosting a wild Prohibition-era party with questionable guests. Mae Murray. Mae Murray, nicknamed the Girl with the Bee-Stung Lips, was a popular silent-era actress whose vanity and poor choices led to a dramatic downfall. In the 1920s, Murray was a glamorous star of films like The Merry Widow and A Ziegfeld Follies Darling. But as the decade ended, she made a series of ruinous decisions. Most infamously, in 1927, Murray let her new husband, a bold European prince named David Mandavani, convince her to quit her lucrative contract at MGM, essentially walking out on studio chief Louis B. Mayer. Mayer, already fed up with Murray's on-set tantrums and diva antics, responded by blacklisting her in Hollywood. It was a career-ending mistake. Having spurned the biggest studio, Murray found herself unemployable by the early 1930s. Worse still, the spendthrift Mandavani squandered her fortune. By the time he divorced her in 1934, he had torpedoed her career and drained her of all of her money, even seizing custody of their child. Murray, once worth a fortune, spiraled into poverty. In later years, she was spotted living in humble hotels and even found wandering the streets in a confused state, a far cry from her days as a Hollywood trendsetter. The public came to see her as a cautionary tale, the once bright star undone by foolish hubris and marital misjudgment. Lupe Velez. Lupe Velez, known as the Mexican Spitfire, captivated 1930s audiences with her feisty humor and fiery temperament on screen and off. A successful Hollywood comedian, Velez was equally famous for her flamboyant, impulsive behavior in private life, which earned her a reputation as volatile and rash. The press eagerly reported her romantic dramas and outbursts. She conducted passionate affairs with stars like Gary Cooper and Johnny Weissmuller, often marked by jealous quarrels. One legend claims she once chased Cooper with a knife. Velez's quick temper became part of her public persona, an exotic firebrand who spoke her mind. While this made her an early Latina film star, it also led many to view her as uncontrollable or foolish. Studio publicity leaned into her personal magnetism, flamboyant ways, and sharp temper, dubbing her the Mexican Spitfire in recognition of her wild spirit. By the 1940s, Velez's film roles slipped to B-grade farces, and her personal life unraveled. In 1944, unmarried and discovering she was pregnant, a scandalous situation for a Catholic Mexican woman, Velez made a famously tragic decision. Rather than face the shame, she staged an elaborate suicide, arranging her bedroom with flowers and donning a silk gown for a final supper. She took an overdose of pills, expecting a picturesque end. Instead, the combination of barbiturates and alcohol made her violently ill. Velez staggered to the bathroom and fell, drowning in the toilet. Frances Farmer. Hailed for her natural talent and striking looks, Farmer bristled at studio control and refused to play the docile starlet. She openly criticized the film industry and pursued serious theater work on the side, but her defiance came at a cost. By 1942, Farmer's personal life was unraveling. She divorced her first husband and was suspended by Paramount for rejecting a part. That same year, her troubles exploded publicly. In October 1942, Farmer was arrested for driving drunk with headlights off during a wartime blackout, a bizarre offense that earned her a $500 fine and a judicial order to abstain from alcohol. When she failed to pay the full fine, a warrant was issued. Police dragged a disheveled, intoxicated Farmer from a hotel in January 1943, triggering a notorious courtroom spectacle. The actress, enraged, floored a matron, bruised an officer, and fought so wildly that jail matrons removed her shoes to prevent her from kicking them. Sensational headlines described Farmer as a violent madwoman. Rather than jail, the 29-year-old was shipped to a psychiatric ward, the first of several forced institutionalizations. Doctors diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia. Over the next years, Farmer endured brutal treatment in mental asylums, including insulin shock therapy and alleged abuses that all but obliterated her spirit. By the time she was released in 1950, the one-time rising star was a broken figure, her career in tatters. Farmer later wrote bitterly of being raped by orderlies and chained in padded cells during her confinement. While some of her memoirs' claims are disputed, there is no doubt her rebellion against Hollywood's confines led to a devastating real-life bad girl narrative. Errol Flynn. A notorious womanizer and heavy drinker, Flynn indulged in a life of excess that led to infamy. In 1943, at the height of his fame, Flynn was charged with statutory rape of 2 underage teenage girls, a sensational trial that transfixed the nation. Though he was acquitted, the proceedings painted him as the ultimate Hollywood libertine. Far from scaring off fans, the case actually boosted Flynn's bad boy legend. Young men bragged of being "in like Flynn," adopting a phrase that became slang for sexual success. Flynn himself quipped glibly in court about not checking girls' birth certificates, reinforcing the public's view of him as devilishly irresponsible. He seemed invincible, but his habits caught up to him. By the 1950s, Flynn's prodigious alcohol consumption and free-spending ways left him a broken joke, in his own words. The once dashing hero had become bloated, gray, and unreliable on set. Major studios shunned him, and he scraped by doing cheap foreign films while living on a yacht, drink in hand. Flynn died of a heart attack at just 50, his body worn out by decades of debauchery. Contemporaries lamented his squandered potential. As one biography noted, Flynn couldn't deal with success and never learned restraint. His memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, unabashedly cataloged a lifetime of outrageous exploits, from drunken brawls to drug-fueled parties, virtually celebrating the impulsive choices that ruined him. George Raft. George Raft was a 1930s movie gangster famous for his suave, tough guy image, and infamous for career decisions so poor they've become Hollywood legend. A former dancer with real underworld connections, Raft had a knack for picking hits early in his career. But by the 40s, his ego and fear of being upstaged led him to reject one plum role after another. He turned down Dead End 1937 because he thought the villainous character wasn't sympathetic enough. Humphrey Bogart took the part and earned critical praise. Raft's pattern of refusal continued at Warner Brothers, where he infamously passed on 2 roles that could have defined his legacy: the lead in High Sierra 1941 and the role of Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon 1941. Raft didn't want to play a gangster who dies at the end of High Sierra, nor did he trust an unproven director like John Huston to remake The Maltese Falcon, so he balked. Both films, of course, became classics with Bogart as star, launching Bogart's A-list career while Raft's own star faded. Industry wags at the time remarked that never has one actor so torpedoed his own career while making another actor a star at the same time. Indeed, Raft's string of no's effectively handed Bogart the roles that made him a legend. By the mid-1940s, Raft's bankability was spent. Studios grew tired of his demands for script approval and co-star vetoes. He was dubbed box office poison and struggled to find meaningful work, reduced to appearing in knockoff thrillers and European B-movies. Raft's ties to real mob figures also spooked studio bosses. Once a top draw, he ended up in the 1950s playing cameo parodies of his old persona, and decades later, a brief spoof in Some Like It Hot. In old age, Raft admitted his missteps. As one film scholar put it, he passed on many classic roles and spent the rest of his 50-year career living in their shadow. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake epitomized cool glamour in the early 1940s with her signature peak, a beau blonde hair, and smoldering roles in film noir. But beneath the icy facade, Lake's combative attitude and personal demons derailed her career and left her labeled a difficult star who squandered her talent. Co-stars and crew openly complained about her on-set behavior. Lake, barely 5 feet tall, had a chip on her shoulder and a bad temper, often arriving late and feuding with colleagues. Frederick March derided her as a brainless little blonde after she reportedly played pranks on him during filming. As her fame grew, Lake also developed a drinking problem that exacerbated her mood swings. By the late 40s, her star was on the wane. She was deemed unreliable and hard to work with, at a time when the studio system had no patience for unruly actresses. Her decline was swift and steep. By the late 1940s, Lake's career began to decline, due in part to her alcoholism, one account notes bluntly. She went from headlining major Paramount pictures to scraping for work in B-movies. Financial troubles mounted. In 1951, she declared bankruptcy. In perhaps her most famously foolish episode, a nearly destitute Lake was discovered in 1962 working as a cocktail waitress in a cheap New York hotel bar using a fake name. The once luminous star insisted she wasn't broke, but the image of Veronica Lake serving drinks to oblivious patrons made headlines worldwide. Rather than shy away from the indignity, she capitalized on it by writing a frank autobiography, Veronica, in which she admitted to years of heavy drinking and regrets. Lake's final act was a modest resurgence on stage in England, but by then the narrative was set. she was the fallen angel of Hollywood. Public memory fixated on how her bad reputation, terminally late, rude, mentally ill alcoholic, as one biographer put it, had destroyed a once promising career. When Veronica Lake died in 1973 at just 50, the Los Angeles Times obituary noted how she faded almost overnight after the 40s, going from pin-up queen to jobs as a factory worker and cocktail waitress before disappearing into obscurity. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's life reads like a primer on Hollywood self-destruction. A stunning blonde starlet of the early 1950s, Payton had a meteoric rise and an even more rapid fall owing to scandalous relationships, reckless partying, and addiction. After a breakout role opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye 1950, Payton quickly developed a reputation for wild living. She juggled affairs and fueled gossip columns with her brazen antics. In 1951, she became entangled in a love triangle with actor Franchot Tone, her fiancé and swaggering B-movie actor Tom Neal. Rather than choose discretion, Payton flaunted both romances, and the rivalry erupted into violence. Neal brutally beat Tone in a jealous confrontation, leaving Tone in a coma with a smashed face, a concussion, a broken nose, and a fractured cheekbone. The incident was front-page news. Payton's decision to string along two men took a major hit on her reputation. As one observer noted, she never recovered from being branded a wanton femme fatale. Though she briefly married Tone, the marriage imploded after mere months, and her true love Neal ultimately wouldn't marry her, leaving Payton both romantically and professionally ruined. In Hollywood's eyes, she was box office poison. Studios deemed her more trouble than she was worth. By the mid-1950s, Payton spiraled into alcoholism and even heroin use. She lost custody of her young son in 1956, a blow from which she never rebounded. With no work and mounting debts, Payton descended into Los Angeles' Skid Row underbelly. By 1962, the one-time star was prostituting herself on Sunset Boulevard for as little as $40 to support her habits. That year, she was arrested for soliciting, her mugshot a haunting testament to hard living. In a final act of unvarnished candor, Payton penned a 1963 tell-all autobiography bluntly titled I Am Not Ashamed, in which she declared, "I'm a whore," and chronicled her shocking downfall. It did little to restore her reputation. She died in 1967 at age 39, penniless and physically ravaged by years of abuse. Jane Mansfield. Jane Mansfield personified the dumb blonde bombshell of the 1950s, deliberately so, and it both made and marred her career. Blessed with an hourglass figure and a shrewd instinct for publicity, Mansfield relentlessly courted attention with jaw-dropping stunts. She popped out of low-cut dresses at press events. One 1957 photo of Sophia Loren ogling Mansfield's exposed cleavage became iconic. She once gate-crashed a Jane Russell party by hopping into a pool in a skimpy swimsuit. These antics earned Mansfield massive media coverage, but also a reputation as a stereotype, almost a caricature, of the dumb blonde. Bigger, blonder, dumber, and more publicity-conscious than any who had gone before. In reality, Mansfield was far from stupid. She reportedly had an IQ of 163 and spoke multiple languages, yet she understood that playing dumb sold tickets. She leaned fully into her self-created persona as Hollywood's smartest dumb blonde, quipping in character on talk shows and never breaking the facade even when host Johnny Carson pressed her about her brains. By the early 1960s, however, the act had worn thin. Mansfield's film roles deteriorated to low-budget fare that existed only to showcase her curves. In 1963, in what many saw as a desperate move, she became the first American actress of her stature to pose nude in a feature film, Promises, Promises, a clear sign her career was on the skids. Studios dropped her, and she scraped by with nightclub appearances and tawdry publicity gimmicks. Her personal life was equally flashy and turbulent. 3 marriages, including to bodybuilder Mickey Hargitay, public spats, and constant tabloid fodder. A notorious incident in 1966 had Mansfield flirting with Satanism for publicity, served up in papers as another kooky misadventure. Tragically, her life was cut short in a 1967 car accident, killing her at 34 and forever sealing her legend. Mansfield's legacy is double-edged. On one hand, as a savvy self-promoter who became a pop culture icon. On the other, as a cautionary figure who became trapped in the very dumb blonde image she manufactured. Zsa Zsa Gabor. Zsa Zsa Gabor epitomized a certain kind of vintage Hollywood celebrity, glamorous, glib, and famously shallow in the public's eyes. A former beauty queen from Hungary, Gabor's film roles were few and modest. It was her larger-than-life persona, dripping in diamonds, trading barbs about her 9 husbands, and calling everyone darling, that kept her in the spotlight for decades. Quick with a witty one-liner, she joked that she was a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep his house. Many found her self-indulgent and ditzy. By the 1980s, Zsa Zsa was better known for outrageous talk show appearances than any acting. Then came the slap. In 1989, 72-year-old Gabor was pulled over in Beverly Hills for a traffic stop, and in a fit of aristocratic pique, she slapped the police officer across the face. This real-life farce, the slap heard around the world, triggered a bizarre trial that Gabor turned into her greatest show yet. On the stand, Zsa Zsa was unrepentant and audacious. She insulted the officer's masculinity, accused him of manhandling her, and even shouted that the American justice system was worse than Nazi Hungary for making her answer to charges. The courtroom circus featured a Zsa Zsa impersonator getting into a fake fight in the halls, and crowds wearing Hang Zsa Zsa t-shirts. The judge scolded Gabor for milking the proceedings as a publicity stunt and showing continual contempt for the law. Indeed, the district attorney lamented that she made a mockery out of everything, trying to turn the trial into a farce. Gabor was ultimately convicted of assault, driving without a license, and having an open champagne flask in her Rolls-Royce, serving 3 days in jail. Rather than damaging her, the incident only enhanced Zsa Zsa's legend as the ultimate high-camp socialite. It confirmed the public's perception that she was flighty, entitled, and addicted to fame at any cost. In her later years, incapacitated by a stroke, Gabor faded from public view, but anecdotes of her silly quips and that notorious slap kept her in pop culture memory. George Lazenby. George Lazenby holds a unique footnote in Hollywood history as the man who walked away from James Bond, a decision widely deemed one of cinema's great blunders. In 1969, the Australian model-turned-actor landed the coveted 007 role as Sean Connery's initial replacement. His debut in On Her Majesty's Secret Service was reasonably well received, and the studio was prepared to sign him for 6 more Bond films. But Lazenby, then in his late 20s and riding a wave of 1960s counterculture hubris, stunned everyone by quitting the franchise after just 1 outing. Advised by his agent and imbibing the era's hippie ethos, Lazenby became convinced that the tuxedoed super spy was a relic of the past. I had advice that James Bond was over. It was love, not war. Being the 60s, I bought into that, he admitted later. He turned down a lucrative multi-picture contract, even millions of dollars under the table, that producers offered to entice him back, because he fancied himself a free spirit destined for spaghetti westerns and new Hollywood glory. It proved a catastrophic misjudgment. He just couldn't deal with success. He was so arrogant, recalled Bond producer Cubby Broccoli, calling Lazenby's casting the biggest mistake in 16 years. Once out of Bond, Lazenby found doors slamming shut. He had few acting chops to fall back on and quickly had difficulty finding work after his lone outing as Bond, at one point resorting to taking out a Variety ad begging for jobs. By the mid-1970s, he was adrift, appearing in low-rent European films and living off the fading notoriety of having been 007. Lazenby later confessed that quitting Bond was a mistake. His co-star Diana Rigg was more blunt. Poor old George. He was definitely the architect of his own demise as a film star. He thought he was a film star immediately and started throwing his weight around. Roger Moore concurred that Lazenby took some bad advice and squandered an unparalleled opportunity. To Lazenby's credit, he eventually made peace with his choice, noting that had he stayed Bond, he might not have enjoyed the family life he eventually had. Lawrence Tierney. Lawrence Tierney was a tough guy actor of the 1940s who earned notoriety not just for playing gangsters, but for being one off-screen. After a breakthrough as Dillinger in 1945, Tierney had the rugged looks and talent to be a leading man. Instead, he became better known for an endless string of drunken brawls and arrests that torpedoed his career. Tierney developed a serious alcohol problem and an explosive temper. Between 1944 and 1951, he was arrested at least 12 times in Los Angeles for brawling, often after nights of heavy drinking. He literally stood for more mugshots than publicity photos. One year, he ripped a public payphone off a wall during a bar fight. Another time, he smashed a restaurant patron in the face with a sugar bowl after being cut off from booze. He didn't discriminate in his dust-ups. Tierney punched civilians, cops, anyone who crossed him. In 1958, he was arrested for slugging 2 police officers during yet another barroom melee. The New York Times quipped that by then he'd been booked more often than John Dillinger himself. Hollywood studios lost patience. In 1952, Paramount canceled a promising contract after Tierney got in a bar fight shortly before filming. They simply wanted no part of his chaos. As work offers dried up, Tierney spiraled further. By the 1960s, he was essentially blacklisted, reduced to odd TV bits and manual jobs. At one point, he was reportedly driving a taxi and working construction. Astonishingly, Tierney lived into his 80s and managed a late-life acting renaissance, notably as the curmudgeonly crime boss in Reservoir Dogs, 1992. Even that was on brand. Director Quentin Tarantino recalled Tierney was arrested during the shoot for firing a gun in a drunken dispute. Thanks for watching. If these tales of glamorous blunders made you raise an eyebrow or chuckle, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us your favorite dumb but dazzling Hollywood moment in the comments.